Right, hello, I'm Victoria Wiggins. I'm an agile coach. I'm a bit of a process geek. I used to be a developer, and today I'm going to do something really super weird, and I'm not going to talk about processes, and I'm not going to talk about software. I'm going to put myself in a horrible, vulnerable position, and I'm going to talk about neurodiversity, and more specifically, I'm going to talk about neurodiversity and myself. Okay, so, oh, hello, great. Now I can hear me. I have ADHD, dyspraxia and dyslexia. Why on earth would I talk about this? Well, I think that conversations are really important, and I think everyone else in the room does too. There are lots of myths around these topics, and I think that I can put myself out there as an advocate for this. And I think that I can try and dispel some of those myths and try and start conversations. And I want you to take those conversations back. I want you to feel that you can talk about your differences and help people in your teams talk about theirs too. So I'm going to very briefly cover what makes people different in general, what makes me different specifically, and hopefully why it's pretty cool, and why you should want to support neurodiversity in your teams. So, okay. The human genome has roughly 3 million base pairs, and 99.5% of them are the same in absolutely every single one of us. We are all remarkably similar. Everything we think of as ourself, what makes us an individual, so much of that is written out by our starting code. So much of that is how tall we are, whether we have earlobes, whether we like coriander, and some of that is how well the two sides of your brain speak to each other, and how well we use specific areas for their specific jobs. We're humans. We love labeling things. We love grouping things. We like putting labels on, like ADHD, like autism. And neurodiversity is this stance that these variations are part of the natural spectrum of the human condition. It finds its origins in helping people, supporting people with autism, but it's now sort of being expanded to help people who want to say that by changing attitudes, by maybe changing our environments, and by being thoughtful, we can make space for people in our workplaces with all sorts of brains. And Dr. Sally Ann Freudenberg asked if I'd put this together and speak about my difference and how I think it helps me in my work. And I'm hoping that in doing so, I can contribute in some small way to what she's doing with Catherine Kirk in setting up the Inclusive Collaboration campaign, which there should be a big logo here. I'll show you the link at the end. So this is a campaign to raise awareness of neurodiversity in workplaces and to show the creativity and the innovation that having neurodiverse teams can help with us. So I want to start conversations today that you can take back. So, stuff I have to deal with. Imagine a picture of me and some stuff. Like much of the maternal side of my family, I am dyslexic and dyspraxic. I'll explain what they are in a second. And when I was about 7, my mum started to notice that I was a bit more of a handful than maybe other children my age, that I was quite impulsive, that I would just randomly say things that maybe weren't appropriate for the situation. She took me to GP, and the GP told her that I was hyperactive, as it was termed back then in the dark ages. And I'm not alone. So roughly 4% of the adult population has ADHD. Roughly 10% has dyslexia. And somewhere between 5 and 10% is dyspraxic. So you work with a lot of people who have one of these conditions. Not only that, but some of them might not know that they do. A lot of people aren't diagnosed. I'll explain more about that, why that might happen in a bit. So what's ADHD? There are 2 main categories, and then there's the sort of, you've got both of these. So hyperactive impulsive type, which is people who fidget, struggle to stay seated, they interrupt each other, blurt out answers, and they struggle with self-control. Inattentive type, which the attention deficit, that's people who have trouble sustaining attention, following detailed instruction. They have trouble organizing tasks and activities, and they're forgetful, easily distracted by external stimuli, and they often lose things. Combined type is obviously where you have at least 6 of one and 6 of the other. Cool. Dyslexia is really about information processing, so it's not really about reading and writing. It's about how we process the information we get from the world around us. And dyspraxia, which is its proper name is developmental coordination disorder, is a common disorder that affects movement and coordination. So essentially, dyspraxia and dyslexia are caused by differences in how different parts of the brain talk to each other and what parts of the brain you're trying to use for what jobs. And ADHD is caused by different structures in the brain and different brain chemistry. So these things are always more commonly diagnosed in boys. Girls, for some reason, and this is also true for autism, seem to be able to mask these behaviours just by not joining in with sports, hiding their work, just not drawing attention to themselves. And people just don't seem as bothered as well if girls are clumsy. So I'm going to run you through some of the characteristics of my gifts. I don't have time to cover all of the symptoms, but I'm hoping if I can just give you a few, it will give you an idea of what this is. Okay, cool. So continually starting new tasks before finishing old ones, an inability to focus or prioritize. Big, horrible problems are amazing. Starting new things, making progress, this increases dopamine in your brain, so the reward center. And that's one of the chemicals that's lacking in ADHD, so that's amazing. I love big, horrible problems. I love finishing things. Again, reward, woohoo, dopamine. However, between starting something and finishing something is a big, boring bit, especially once the sort of hard stuff's done. When it gets to the bitty tidying up bit, it's not just not being able to prioritize tasks, it's also information, like, and what senses to pay attention to. So random noises, lights changing, other stuff can just sort of give you extra information in your brain that you don't know which bits to ignore and which bits to have. So in order to keep your dopamine going and make yourself feel more normal, you just keep starting things and starting things and starting things. And you're doing 12 things and not finishing anything. Taking risks. So, as well as dopamine, ADHD people lack adrenaline and glucose in their brain. So, we binge on caffeine and sugar and carbs and pasta, and maybe sometimes like to do things that give us a little bit of a buzz. So, some of this is actually our brains tricking us into doing something that's risky to try and get that normal adrenaline level. And some of it seems to also be that the changes in the structure of your brain mean that you maybe don't analyze risk in the same way as other people. There's the typical dyslexic, poor spelling, terrible, writing, typing, grasping small objects, lack of coordination, balance, movement. I drop and spill stuff down myself all the time. I get lost going anywhere. I don't know my right from left. They're not inherent inside me. I stand too close to people if I have to look down and look up, but that's bewildering. I can't do that. This is really embarrassing for other people. And so this is where colleagues come and sort of, when I'm saying, when I was a developer and someone said, can you just move something left a bit? And I'd go, and they'd go, oh, wait, maybe you should think about putting a sticker on your monitor, and then no one will know you don't know right from why? Right, who's making the world better for? Sometimes when I'm stressed, this gets worse, but most of the time it's something I just laugh about. Forgetfulness, continually losing or misplacing things and struggling to meet deadlines. This speaks for itself. Time doesn't have a feel for me, so I don't know if I spent 10 minutes on something or 30. And the lack of spatial awareness means that sometimes I don't know where I've left something. I wouldn't change any of this. I think the things it gives me, which I'm going to come on to right now, are really important, and this doesn't define me. So, what are the good stuff? So, as well as the symptoms, there are some characteristics of ADHD and dyslexia in general which are pretty awesome. And there are also things that I have learnt to do. Coping mechanisms that I have learnt to do on purpose. And once you understand how you do something, and you've learnt to do something deliberately, you can understand how to then apply that to something else. So something that's for one person's innate, I instead have a set of skills for. And this means that I can sometimes apply this in interesting ways. Some of the positives are things like hyperfocus. So this is the ability of, once I've found my flow, to just code. I could sit there for 5 hours. No one could, I won't hear, I won't see, I'm just code. Or sitting down and reading the whole of Harry Potter in one sitting. Creative problem solving. Back to those big problems. ADHD loves them. I'll find one way of doing something or another way of doing something. And that lack of filtering, that means that sometimes I've got too much information coming in, that sometimes means that sometimes I just think, couldn't we just try this? And also, you can scale up those coping mechanisms. So the way I've learnt to get out the door, I can then use exactly those same processes scaled up to manage an enormous project. I have good memory for specific detail, so dyslexics have better peripheral vision, and again, with the not filtering or prioritizing information, I remember most specific details for almost everything I've ever worked on. So someone would say, you remember that project 5 years ago? And I do. I'm a super efficient context switcher and multitasker, so if you can't focus, then you get really good at multitasking. This stresses lots of other people out if I change what I'm doing over and over again, but it's fine for me. Patterns, again, dyslexics are really good at seeing when something doesn't fit. So if you use all that extra information you've got, that sometimes you don't even know where it's come from, you can just say, no, there's something wrong about this. And that's one of the ways I manage risk, is I can see patterns. And calm in a crisis. If I'm centered and something outside goes wrong to my project or my team, so not to me, but then I get that adrenaline spike. And whilst other people sort of flap and panic, I can just totally focus. And then hopefully use everything that I've spoken about to find a solution, and that feels pretty awesome. So, how do you help other people find their awesome? There are loads of us. You're already working with us. And there are even more people with other neurodiverse conditions. We've worked really hard to get where we are. So one, why should we need help? Why should you care? And even if you did care, what do you want to do about it? So the answer to one is it's exhausting coping. Context switching or even sort of hyper-focus are very, very tiring things. And this sometimes means that people try and help us and can accidentally, if they don't understand our conditions, maybe do more harm than good. So an old manager of mine once came up to me and said, "You're the most productive member of my team. You've fixed more bugs than anyone else. But I've also noticed, I've pulled up your internet browsing history, and you look at an astonishing number of web pages a day. Imagine how much you could get done if you could just focus all day." I didn't know anything about how my brain worked back then. I couldn't explain to him that exactly the same problems I have that meant I got more done than anyone else were why I couldn't pretend to be focused. I couldn't look focused. I could just get more done. So for number 2, which is why should you care? Well, if you're looking at the bottom line, if you're a bottom line human, it's good for business. For everyone else, it's good for people. If you are working in a team, knowledge is really difficult to replace. People are really difficult to replace, which we need to work on managing stress, on helping people be productive, helping people stay productive. And having these sorts of conversations, opening conversations about how we work, doesn't just help people who are neurodiverse, it helps everyone. And for 3, it's all about conversations. So I'll put up the slide where I've got some links. Here, the top one is for the Inclusive Collaboration campaign. There you'll find other great talks, and articles on things like creating user manuals for members of your team, other tools and tricks for just helping structure having conversations like this. But mainly just talk to the people you work with. Ask them how they work best. Talk about how you work best. Talk about your difference. Give people permission to contribute. Ask people if they need help making space Make any sensible changes that come up, and don't make assumptions. It's not obvious. Just carry on the conversation. Thank you.